Your next Pulverize will overpower every 12 seconds while you remain healthy. But what does overpower even mean, and when are you healthy? Also, the Fortify mechanic, vulnerable. What does count as crowd control in 20% bonus damage to crowd controlled enemies? Let me break everything down to you step by step. Timestamps are in the description below. Just jump to the point where you would like to be so you have a library of terms with their explanations. Let's start with two easy ones that are often keywords in skills. Healthy and injured. Healthy means your character has to have more than 80% of their total life, while an injured character has less than 35% of their life. So if you have a skill that does more damage versus injured, is it truly worth it considering that you have to do 65% damage first and then you do only the bonus damage on 35% left? Vulnerable is another simple one that is just flat plus 20% damage. Gotta love vulnerable effects, just makes everything easier to kill. Now let's get to more complicated mechanics, and that would be Fortify and Overpower. Both are intermingled with each other. Coming back to our Druid, Enhanced Pulverize. Your next Pulverize will overpower every 12 seconds while you remain healthy. So you have to have over 80% of your health left, and then you will overpower. And to sum up Overpower, it has a 3% chance that any skill will deal extra damage based on your life and fortified life. So in case of the Druid ability, you scrape out that 3% chance to get the Overpower every 12 seconds. But how much damage would that be exactly? And is it worth it? We have a very complicated formula that we can simplify. Basically, it would be base damage times stat bonuses plus life plus fortified life times stat bonuses times Overpower bonus. Too complicated. Let's say your base damage is 20. And let's ignore stat bonuses. So this would simply be plus life and fortified life. We have 100 life and we're fortified by 20 life as well. So our 20 base damage gets already plus 120 on top. And that all gets multiplied by the Overpower bonus that you can find in your stat sheet. Base for the Druid would be 64.25%. So that's times 64.25%. And the whole thing equals to 229.95 damage. And that's your increase that you would get with the Overpower. So you kind of notice from 20 to 200 damage every 12 seconds with your Druid skill. And that's without factoring in even more fortified life, bonus to Overpower damage, and other shenanigans. Can be extremely powerful, but gotta really fit into your whole build, especially with Fortify. And now, what is fortified life? Fortify is a status effect that makes you more tanky. And there's a variety of skills that get there. We're going to take the Necrotic Carapace from the Necromancer here. When a corpse is formed from your skills or your minions, Fortify for 2% of your base life. Fortify kind of fills up your bubble. It's like a red shield over your red health. And as soon as you have more Fortify than your actual life, you also take 10% less damage. You notice 2% of your max HP. It might take a little bit to actually fill that bar up, but against boss fights, it's kind of like easy to get that going, especially with the corpse generation on the Necromancer. Going back to the drawing board, you have a base life of 100. And every corpse you make, here, this is a corpse, equals to 2% of your base life being added as Fortify. Which means in this calculation that every corpse is adding 2 Fortify. That's 2F. Therefore, we'd have to create 50 corpses to have 100 F. But again, if we're looking at our Druid, for example, every fortified life, if we look at our Druid example again, every fortified life is a bonus to our Overpower damage. Or also for the Necromancer, I mean, Overpower is a 3% chance on every single skill to do this bonus damage. And if you're fortified, bonus damage. Now, after 51 corpses, you are at over 100 fortified life, and you would take 10% less damage. Obviously, there's items, aspects, and also the skill itself go to 6% of your max life, making everything go way faster. Fortified is really a great mechanic to tank yourself up tremendously. Now, often you find items that say bonus damage to crowd-controlled enemies, 50 to 100%, for example. What's crowd control? Slow, immobilize, stun, knockback, knockdown, taunt, fear, tether, daze, chill, and freeze. Those are all effects that you can apply to your opponents with your skills to then get that bonus damage. Keep in mind that not every status condition can be applied to bosses, but bosses do have this blue stagger bar below them. And as soon as you fill up the stagger bar with your immobilization effects, with your crowd control effects, they count as staggered, and staggered is CC'd, any type of CC. So you will be doing the damage against knockdown, knockback, taunted, feared, tethered, dazed. They're just literally everything as they're staggered, and your bonus damage applies. Then there's something called Lucky Hit Chance, which you can also increase tremendously with a lot of items. There's Lucky Hit Instant Execute, and for the Necromancer, there would be Hued Flash. Lucky Hit, your damage has up to a 40% chance to create a corpse at the target location. This chance is doubled against bosses. You can tune this up to 12%, so 24% Lucky Hit chance against bosses. And Lucky Hit is essentially that, a bonus to your basic skills to do bonus damage to trigger as you do X, Y, Z. Now, last interesting thing that seems trivial, but I see a lot of people get wrong all the time. There's two types of damage bonuses. There's the plus 100% and there's the times 100%. Let's say you do 400 damage. If you now have an effect that will give you plus 50% bonus damage, you would end up essentially 600 damage. It's 400 plus 50%. 50% of 400 is 200, 600. Simple. But there are also multiplicative effects. At first eye, it does seem the same. Let's say we get X 50% bonus to whatever kind of status effect would also end up with 600 damage. Now that's the same, but in the grand scheme of things, it's vastly different. Because now if you have more multiplicative effects, let's say your corpse explosion does plus 50% damage, and you find another item that adds another plus 50% damage. So that's plus 50% and plus 50%, which leads to a grand total of 800 damage. But if we now find another item that would give us X50 damage to our corpse explosion, so bonus on that, X50, X50, multiplicative effects, you would end up with a total of 900 damage, which means in total, always look for the multiplicative effects over the additive effects. Yes, I know, trivial, but sometimes it just needs to be written down to make sense. Now circling back to the 900 damage that we have achieved. Now back to the 900 damage that we have achieved. And that in the combination with vulnerable. Vulnerable is a 20% increase, so times 1.2 equals to 1080 damage. Not very much. But now let's assume you get an item that would increase your vulnerable damage by 50%, and another item that increases your damage to vulnerable opponents by 20%. How does that now get factored into the 1.2? And how much damage is it at the end? And this works following. You're going to take the X times 1.2, but this one gets plus 0.5 and plus 0.2 in total into the calculation, leading to a grand total of 1,710 damage. So the percentages are working additive, and that whole thing goes multiplicative onto your damage. You will counter all of these keywords throughout your Diablo 4 journey, and you'll always be scratching your head and asking, what was this again? So here's your library with all the terms. I hope this will help you along your Diablo 4 journey, as these terms will crop up and appear every single time you find a new item, every second you pick a new skill. It's a constant thing. So memorize this and keep it in mind. Also, if you're unsure about what world tier you should choose on your first playthrough, 1 and 2, because actually only world tier 3 matters since there's unique items, watch this video. It perfectly breaks it down and explains it to you.